Today, on Ted and Pat's Most Excellent Adventure, we discuss digital pianos and the realistic sound engines trying to recreate an acoustic instrument. We're going to talk about the philosophies of modeling and sampling and how we've gotten to some of the best sounding digital pianos ever created here in 2021. What is all the magic behind the keys? Let's check it out.
Hi, this is Ted with Alamo Music Center in downtown San Antonio, Texas.
I'm Patrick Marr. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channels, check out our other videos, sign up for notifications, like our videos, leave us comments. We appreciate the interaction and we love to communicate with you guys. Well, Ted, we've got a very deep topic here, and I think today we're going to scratch the surface of it. I think it's important to talk about to the everyday consumer, to people who are interested, hobbyists, enthusiasts, people like us who are we don't care about the big lab report behind this, but we do care about what do these mean for us as musicians, as hobbyists.
Sure.
How important are these things that are making this sound
End
like
users.
a piano? Yeah.
Right.
And so there's, like we said in the intro, there's two basic philosophies behind recreating an acoustic piano on a digital piano. There's something called sampling, which is pretty much most manufacturers today are using sampling or a basis of sampling to recreate their piano, and that basically works like you think it would. They mic up the instrument in different ways. They record very high quality versions of each note being pressed, being hit in different velocities, because computing power is where it is today, that process has evolved from early 90s when the sampling was you could
separate notes.
Yeah, it was remember big floppy disks had how many megabytes of
Not much.
Not much. And so the big problem for a long time was how much memory can we put into this to make it sound like an acoustic instrument, because we're sampling.
The original sampling instruments only had a very, very brief, if even a 1 second long sample for each note. Mm-hmm. What came afterwards was usually a synthesized or digital or a modeled sound that was like a piano, but the initial attack of a piano sound really comes out in a sample.
Yeah.
And they found out that most instruments, the initial attack has so much realism that what comes afterwards is kind of secondary. So the first digital pianos that came out that were sampled had millisecond attacks, and then it had whatever sound
decay,
they used
right?
behind for the decay. And I don't know how to describe that. Some of the early ones, besides being 8-bit machines for the sample, when you listen to them, if you're playing long sustained chord, there is a part in there where I describe it sounds plastic. It sounds great at first, then it goes plastic. And that's just the initial attack.
Yeah. And so and it's interesting because
memory's gotten cheap now compared to 40 years ago or 35 years ago.
And you can fit it in something that you can carry around.
And now you can put much longer samples.
And so that kind of unpacks where we are today, and using modeling. I think using that the term modeling is a confusing one, but really it's sound synthesis, and it's using algorithms and formulas to.
But it's an overall system design. It's not just copy the sound. We're going to design a machine that will copy all of these sounds and reproduce these sounds in its own way.
It's like virtual reality, right?
Exactly.
So you have to build the system first to create a world inside.
And initially when the systems are built, like I said, the first samples were 8-bit machines. The 8-bit now is something you put as an effect.
Yeah.
Okay. Initially, at first, the modeling is going to be very limited. There may be 25 overall parameters, but if you get 6 or 7 to start off with, you'll have, and then eventually over time it'll grow up to meet all the parameters.
Yeah, and so I think it's important to kind of rewind to and look at where this idea came from, where amplification of a piano was an important thing. And so touch on the history of that.
The history of it is sound systems. And all you need to think of as a history of sound systems is the Beatles. They didn't tour very loud, but they were the first big act to go out and tour like that. And they were playing through what were public announcement systems at ballparks, like in Shea Stadium. So you can imagine if you had an AM radio and you put a microphone to it and you played it in, Shea Stadium, that's probably a little exactly like what the Beatles sounded like without the people screaming.
Yeah.
So as bands and shows and tours got bigger, open sound systems and open air concerts were great, except for two things. There were a lot of folk acts, like Crosby, Stills, Nash, a lot of the original rock and rollers had acoustic guitar. So how do you get an acoustic guitar real loud with a big sound system, let alone a big, gigantic acoustic piano real loud for a festival concert? Well, that's when they started to have problems with feedback, EQ, and running sound systems.
Yeah, with the microphones.
And all that.
Wasn't going to do the job.
So initially on the piano, it kind of went almost the same way that they have on the guitar.
And that's why you see Fender's name enter here in the piano world.
Right. Well, Fender actually bought the Harold Rhodes piano system, which was based on a guitar pickup system for each key. And then that led to other manufacturers making Wurlitzer made one, all these different manufacturers, and everyone actually did not make a good piano clone. They made a good piano substitute with its own natural sound. That was the excitement of buying a certain kind of keyboard back then.
Yeah, the electric piano.
It had, what kind? This one or that one? They had different types of sounds and they played different.
And they sound great. People seek them out today. It's its own thing. It's actually a subcategory on a lot of digital pianos that are sold.
It really is. And the amazing thing now is that with sampling, all of those instruments, a clavinet, a Whirly, a Rhodes, all those things combined, you can get on just about any essential digital piano right now will have those as basic instruments, including a B3 and those kind of organs as well. But in terms of pianos, what they did is they tried the microphones like they did on the guitars. They tried the piezo pickup system. There was an electronic system. Then there was those flat microphones on the soundboard system. Then there's the transducer system, and even bottle caps. Remember the bottle cap
they would stick them on there.
That was one of the beefier things. The problem is it had to go through a preamp, and then you had to boost the sound. So what happens is humans start taking the sound source of this microphone, and what are they doing with it? They're starting to process it. And that right there is step-by-step modeling to get back to what it sounds like if you're sitting there playing it, but you're out there in the middle of the cornfield listening to it. They got to add the bass. They got to cut down the highs. They got to make sure they don't put too much reverb so it doesn't echo forever. So all these things come down to, again, speakers, amplifiers, and EQ. All that is built into every single piano sample, whether it's electronic or acoustic. That's in these instruments.
And so at that point too, it's just interesting because the turn from electric pianos moved to sound synthesis at that point, which created a whole another mess of things.
It did, but remember the one thing, synthesizers were phenomenal, but it took them a long time, like almost 10 years, to get polyphonic.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
To have more than one.
That's one thing a lot of people don't remember. If you wanted to get a whole bank of sounds, you needed a whole bank of keyboards because everyone had to be set up before each song. And so a lot of one of the bands I think of, there's a lot of old footage out. Tangerine Dream is one of them. Great live sounding stuff, but you watch them, it's boring. It's three guys, each of them behind a stack of keyboards.
Trying to get it.
And they're all doing something. You don't know, you kind of figure out who's doing the drums, who's doing this, but they're all doing a multitude of things at the same time so they could present that live.
Yeah. And at that point,
well, once you got polyphonic, the first thing was, but there's still not a better piano. There's still no way to get a grand piano into something that's portable. You could pick up and walk out with. That would be very convenient, easy to use. That was the challenge, to get that initial piano sound. And that didn't really come around until about the mid 80s. A DX7 there were a couple of things that could emulate an acoustic piano really well, and a DX7 was one of them. Not by itself. It needed about at least 6 or 7 more added in, all MIDI together, where each one made a certain part of the sound that went into making the acoustic piano sound.
Wow. And that was early form of modeling.
That's exactly what it was, because one DX7 would make the tone, another one would make a clunking sound, another one would have the decay. And so together, when they all sounded at the same time, it made a very believable piano, especially if you hit it one note at a time. When you started to play chords on it, it started sounding like it needed an overall better EQ or a better presentation. And that's, again, the relying on a system modeling.
So I think that's a perfect analogy for modeling, because you're thinking of all these units that had to come together, all tuned in their own place to create one real sound. And that's what modeling is, and that's where I think there was a breaking point, and they're like, okay, we have to move away from this and technology became, computing power became a lot, it started quickly, the
For a while, they were
storage.
neck and neck
Yeah.
because the amount of memory needed to put a sample, and remember the first sampled pianos, they only sampled this section.
Okay.
And then they would sample this section. So you were fortunate if your entire instrument was sampled maybe more than 6 or 7 times. Now it's every single key, but that's relatively new in the digital world. If you go back 20 years ago, there were still sectional samples because you can only push a note so far before that Munchkinization effect comes in. But they would change it and extend the decay and stuff like that. But since memory has gotten so affordable, it's easier to say, hey man, that's why sampling has taken a lead over modeling, because modeling requires every part of the instrument gets built electronically so that it can work on its own.
And I think one of the biggest issues with modeling today is we have the computing power to do all these formulas, to do all this algorithm, but the amount of time it would take to process all that real fast, by the time you hit the note, you'd be waiting 3 minutes before it sounded off because it was trying to model what the hammer's doing, what the string's doing, what the environment's doing.
Handling all the input to generate an output.
And so that's why we are where we are today, and a lot of these manufacturers like Yamaha, like Kawai, Roland. We'll leave Roland out of this. Yamaha and Kawai right now.
Well, you can include them because if you consider these as not so much sound sources, but their overall system management. Like if you were going to play that keyboard, all those sounds off of this one. So you're going to trigger here and use that sound card, or the other way around. They're not going to play exactly the same.
Exactly.
Because each manufacturer has their own parameters set up for how the entire keyboard or sound is managed. And that's kind of like their modeling system. And you're right, they are proprietary, they belong to each manufacturer. Roland, Kawai, and Yamaha, they each have their own way that the damper pedals work, and each have their own way for how much control goes over their sample. But with all the available private samples that are on the market, where people do put tons and tons of attention into the detail and of sampling, like Chick Corea's piano, there's a whole video of how they took number of months to sample his Fender Rhodes. But if you go to certain keyboard and you plug in electric piano number 2, that's his sample.
Yeah.
It was so good from 25 years ago, it's still around, but they've recently redone it. But that concept is starting to merge because you just can't go out and sample a piano and not put some kind of sound management system over it that has the foundations for a grand piano as its fundamental parameters.
Yeah, and so Yamaha and Kawai, they'll take, and this is why I was separating it from Roland. They'll take their
Those
sampling.
are the 2 leading in acoustic pianos.
Yeah, and they'll take their sampling from their best and their biggest and best. So there's the CFX with Yamaha, and then there's the SKEX with Kawai. But Yamaha's gone as far as binaural sampling, and so that's recording from where you would be sitting in front, where your ears would be sitting right. And so they're thinking of all these creative ways to load in tons of information, saying this is all the sample here. But then they're adding things like virtual resonance modeling, and there's these virtual technician apps on Kawai, and it's transforming the sample. And so, like you said, it's the blending of worlds. Whereas Roland has taken a stance that our V piano is completely a modeling system, and only modeling. It has no sound source, without you going in and saying the piano is the sound source. But it's interesting because it's not born in a sample, and there's a lot of debate online on is this not right? It's not an ethical question, I guess, because it's
no, it's not because there's a couple things that, number one, the biggest problem I think with digital pianos has never been the way they play or the way they sound or anything like that. Because if it's good enough to put to market, someone's going to buy it and use it. Because the idea behind a piano is that people need to be practicing. It would some people say, oh, that man over there is a natural pianist. And my first thought is, that's years of forced behavior that became secondary nature. It's not natural. It's it's taught, it's learned over a
yeah.
long period of time that it seems natural. But the idea is that if you're practicing and learning your concert and your performance pieces on a digital piano, which most pianists want to do because you get complete solitude and privacy and you know you're not bothering anyone. You can just sit there and go through your literature. You still have to adjust that playing, that skill level onto a grand piano when you get there. And I'm a firm believer that in the last 10 to 15 years, more music has been played on digital instruments than on acoustic instruments.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so that's why this modeling and sampling thing is so hot, because there is going to come a time in the future where someone's going to have a modeling piano where everyone's going to say, man, that's the thing. And samples are just a copy of another instrument. And so it's getting there. The system managements have been very impressive for me. The pedals, the damper pedal, the sustain pedal, and the sostenuto pedal has just been really exciting. They did not exist years ago. And any kind of sustain pedal was pretty much a clicker on-off. And now they have partial gradient. That's the other thing. Once you get all these parameters described, you have to put limits and make a gradient for where do you change? When does medium become soft and soft become very soft? Or all these different expressions? Music has this many volume levels listed, so can your instrument reproduce it?
And I've read that the most common issue with modeling is the human ear has, you can tell so closely when the decay is wrong.
It's not only decay, it's milliseconds. And the thing that's fascinating is when you consider that the CD sample rate is, 43,000 times a second, or 44.1 times a second. If you go in, you don't even have to remove like 1%. You could randomly pull slices of that sample out. After you pull out, and we're talking a 1/44th second, okay, sample. After you pull out 6 or 7 of those slices, people can, hey man, it's bumpy. It's fun. There's something wrong with that note. And you can go, you can hear it.
You can.
And it's going by so fast that it's fascinating that you can hear it, and it takes a computer to show you exactly what you're hearing, where it is in there. You're missing the 24,000th one. And you can hear it, that click or that pop. It doesn't take many to move because the human ear is really sharp.
And so that's the big issue with modeling. And this is a fascinating topic, and we could probably go on for a long time. Well, but it's closing remarks.
I have something.
Yeah,
Closing remarks is this. I'll tell you what I really think it's going to come to. I think there's going to come a day where there'll be either a sampled or a modeled keyboard, which will be, hey, you know the recording of this song where it almost sounds like Paris in the Rain, and that piano sounds like it was recorded in the 30s? I want that sound on my record. You can just watch Paris in the Rain, and there it is. And notice that on some of these extended digital keyboards, they're giving you these romantic images of a piano expression. This is a piano, but it sounds mid-range and muddy, like this old Rachmaninoff recording. Or it has the sound of this, 1970s tinny upright piano, like a lot of the John Lennon recordings do. It has that particular sound as a sought-after sound instead of something that someone made.
Yeah, I hope we get there. I mean, I think that's the exciting part about all this, and why we wanted to touch on this topic is because there is a big debate of where is piano technology going. We've gotten to a great place. Things sound very close to the real thing, but they're not the real thing.
And there's always the other option too. Something could be invented and applied along the line that overrides modeling and sampling. There's still new technologies to be invented. So there's nothing but great places to go.
It's cool. This is as close to like AI and virtual reality as you get in the piano world. And I think it's important. It's one of those technical things, but it's very important to players and to people who are seeking out musical instruments, and they're like, well, I want the best thing, and I want to be able to grow with this and make it my own, and make it my own instrument. And that's where all this virtual technology is going, and modeling technology. So if you guys have
questions and comments,
or I'm sure there's a lot of different takes on whether modeling's better or whether the future is going to be just sampling. Let us know what you guys think, and let us know what you've played, and if you love the Roland V piano and you're like, this is the best modeling thing I've ever heard in my life, please let us know, because it's incredible, and there's really cool things that people are doing with it. Well, this is Ted. I'm Patrick. Thank you guys for watching and joining us. Again, if you haven't, please subscribe to our YouTube channels. Check out our other videos. Like and subscribe to our content. We really enjoy making it. And thanks for watching.